Things change, but Deer Park Natural Spring Water is a constant you can count on, bringing you the essence of home for 150 years and counting. Sourced from carefully selected springs, Deer Park Natural Spring Water has naturally occurring electrolytes for a crisp, refreshing taste. Find Deer Park Natural Spring Water at your favorite local retailer today. After 150 years, there's only one thing left to say. Deer Park, that's still good water.
Conservative. Constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, now that we've seen the Frankfort establishment lose more members, the Uniparty up there, on Tuesday night's primaries, what is their next move? What are they going to do next? That's what we will be looking at. Look at a few different options they could go in. Of course, they'll probably choose the worst possible option because, well, they just don't know any better. And a Cabinet for Health and Family Services employee steals nearly $500,000 from the state. We'll talk about how exactly they were able to do this and how it points to the failures that the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, which just has been a complete tire fire ever since Beshear administration has taken over. So we'll cover all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But first, I want to take a moment to discuss an annoyance I have here. And that is the self and supporter delusion that sometimes happens after someone loses an election. So when a person who was, especially an incumbent, but when a person has lost an election, they themselves enter a state of delusion about the type of race they ran because they're trying to somehow make themselves feel better, or more importantly, their supporters, in order to somehow feel better about their selection of a loser, goes ahead and decides to enter into a world of delusion about the person they supported and the kind of race they ran. And I want to give you an example here. So let's look at Killian Timoney. So we all know Killian Timoney lost by a lot to Thomas Jefferson on Tuesday, like 75-25. It wasn't even close. It was a big, huge blowout. I called it. Anyways, and so Timoney made a post on his Twitters where he said, "I called Tom Jefferson a little while ago to congratulate him on his victory. It hurts pretty bad, but he and his team worked really hard to win. I wish him well on his path forward into the general election and serving the 45th to the best of his ability." And so the responses and comments on that are things like, as usual, nothing but class. Another one is hashtag statesman, hashtag class, hashtag character. Another one was, it's all class. It was an honor to be able to knock on a few doors for you. Thank you for your service and for always doing what is right. You will be missed. It's always a class act in high road. Proud to call you my friend. At KY Killian. Thank you for not getting sucked into the hate and ugliness. Thank you for actually caring. You're an excellent example of character for your kids. It's sad that that's the exception and not the norm. And so that is like a lot of the comments where they're like, wow, how classy. What a great guy. What an honest and straightforward campaign you ran. And they say these things to make themselves once again feel better about supporting a person who lost by so much and say, well, at least we're better than the other person, morally, right? Maybe we lost, but the other person had to go so low, and we took the high road, as one of the comments said. Can I remind you of everything that happened during this campaign? I mean, let's just take, for example, let's just pick one thing out of Killian Timoney's campaign. Let me play for you one of his attack ads to remind you. Here is one of his attack ads from his campaign against Thomas Jefferson. Let me play that for you here again.
Thomas Jefferson supports and profits off a violent liberal agenda. Thomas Jefferson makes his money from a violent culture, destruction of property, Black Lives Matter protesters, drag shows for children. Thomas Jefferson pretends to share our Kentucky values. The truth? Thomas Jefferson is just all sorts of wrong for Kentucky.
Now, I remind you, that attack ad came from Killian Timoney's campaign itself. That means that Killian Timoney himself signed off on that attack ad. And it was attacking Thomas Jefferson for having a retirement account, for having a 401k, for having a Roth IRA that held stock in many companies like Procter & Gamble and Amazon. That's what he was attacking him for. Having an account with Charles Schwab, that's a broker, giving his money over to them, that then they turned around and bought stock for Thomas Jefferson, and Killian was attacking him from that. And not only is that ridiculous for Killian Timoney just to attack on, it's not exactly very quote-unquote fair, but Killian Timoney himself, in his own retirement accounts, like, the pensions and things that he has with the states, literally owns stock in these exact same companies. So I could literally take that attack ad and swap out the name Thomas Jefferson for Killian Timoney, and it would still make sense. And I want you, once again, that came from Killian Timoney's campaign itself. Not outside money, not outside groups. I actually don't think Thomas Jefferson's campaign itself actually made a single attack against Killian Timoney itself. Now, when Thomas Jefferson spoke in public, he would talk about Killian Timoney's voting record and how bad it is. But it was all outside money that attacked Killian Timoney, not necessarily Thomas Jefferson himself. He didn't sign off on the attacks. Not that, that's like a giant issue, just something to point out, okay? Because it's being extremely dishonest. We all know you're flailing about. We all know you're not taking the high road. We all know you got down into the dirt and started slinging mud. We all know you don't actually agree with the attacks that you issued on Thomas Jefferson. You know what you were doing. And that's the other thing. I hate it when, whether it's a consultant, a person running for office, or anything else, actually tries to convince people like me that the snake oil they're selling is real. Those of you who follow me on social media saw me go after a guy by the name of Jake Cox. He was the consultant for the Commonwealth Conservative Coalition PAC out of Louisville. He was paid tens of thousands of dollars to run that PAC and just lose on all these races. And I made a funny little video where I was calling him out for just wasting all their money. And those who follow me on social media saw that. And the reason why I called him out was not because he was working for that PAC. I mean, somebody's got to do the job. I understand that. Somebody's going to get paid to do that. And so I guess it might as well be this guy. That wasn't why. Why was because he decided to start quote tweeting me and commenting on the things I was doing, trying to talk trash about the candidates, acting like he actually believing the attacks he was peddling out were true and honest and good, and that they were actually worthwhile. That's why I called him out. Because like I said, don't try to convince me the snake oil you're selling is real. I know it's not, it's not. Just stop. I would respect you more if you just stop. Now, I'm not going to pretend every single campaign's super nice and all the people I quote unquote supported, whatever that means, didn't sling mud too. Some of them did. A lot of the PACs that I liked what they did were slinging mud. Not necessarily crossing a line. They're talking about things like voting records and actions within office from political side of things. I'm talking about people's families, not crossing the line there. But that's politics, and I accept that. Okay, you're going to get into fights and arguments. There's going to be negative campaigning. It's to be expected. But don't try to delude yourself into believing you somehow stood above it all. Took the high road, was the super class act when you clearly weren't. The other thing that is an annoyance to me, just extreme annoyance to me, does make me giggle a bit when I see it though, is when we see establishment cronies go down, especially ones that were in office, go down. And of course, because they were in office and in the moment, they're kind of interesting. They'll get interviewed. And of course, the headlines too, the media knows, oh, this is a Republican. I can get to probably say something negative about Republicans if I go to them. So I'll go ahead and do that. And they do an about face. Then literally what they were saying just a few weeks ago in their campaign. They do an immediate about face. And we're seeing that again this cycle. We'll be going over the about faces that we're seeing after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics.
Things change, but Deer Park Natural Spring Water is a constant you can count on, bringing you the essence of home for 150 years and counting. Sourced from carefully selected springs, Deer Park Natural Spring Water has naturally occurring electrolytes for a crisp, refreshing taste. Find Deer Park Natural Spring Water at your favorite local retailer today. After 150 years, there's only one thing left to say. Deer Park, that's still good water.
And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So before the break, we were digging into some annoyances I have after elections, and one is when candidates or their supporters or their campaign workers try to pretend they ran this like somehow morally high road campaign when they clearly didn't. They got down in the mud like everybody does in politics. It's what happens. Don't try to pretend you're above it all. How that annoys me. But the thing that makes me laugh is when, but also kind of concerned, it means you should really pay a lot of attention. And that is when we see establishment, especially incumbents, go down, and how we suddenly see this like about face on what they actually believe. We saw this actually in 2022. It was really interesting to me to watch, and that was with Adam Koenig was the one who did this in 2022 for me. And what he did is after he lost to Steve Doan beat him in the primary, and he was super a sourpuss about it. He was just so upset about it. He was so angry. So a few weeks later, he does like this hefty interview for Link NKY, I believe was the newspaper there, where he's talking all about how much he hates the conservative liberty movement and how they're all full of it and they won't accomplish anything. And basically he's just going on a rant about how he hates everyone and everything, certainly things he would never be saying if he had won office. And one of the things he said in there was he's talking about how the GOP is too extreme on abortion, that our pro-life stances are too extreme, and in the end, we're going to lose everything unless we moderate around abortion and put in exemptions and start letting people murder babies up until like 20 weeks and whatever else he said in the article. I don't remember everything he said, but it was basically, it was an about face for sure on abortion. I talked about it on the show at the time. That is completely opposite from what he was literally saying just a few weeks ago. He was running mailers. He was running ads in his district talking about how amazing and pro-life he is. Yeah, you got me. I've been lying to you this entire time. I mean, yeah, I just engaged in all this campaigning and stuff where I swear that wasn't me. But really, you're right, that was me. I've been lying to you, which definitely points to why you should be worried about who you vote for. And you need to pay attention to not just their words, but their actions. And once again, Killian Timoney is doing this same thing this round. He's changing his tune. And to tell you what he's changing his tune on, we have to go to Senate Bill 150. Now, some of you have heard me mention this on the show. Many of you are probably aware of the bill, but Senate Bill 150 passed in 2023. And it was a bill that did a litany of things. But one of the things it did was it banned gender transition surgery. Because remember, the University of Kentucky was performing gender transition surgeries, cutting the body parts off minors because they said they were a different gender. University of Kentucky was doing that. And this bill stopped them from doing it, and also says, hey, look, you can't give these hormone blockers and these chemical castration drugs, because that's what they are. They're giving them the same drugs they give to rapists in order to chemically castrate them. They give to kids through gender transitioning, and they give them puberty blockers, and they promise it doesn't hurt them, but it certainly does. And obviously, Senate Bill 150 came down, and Republicans, by en masse, voted for to pass it, because they're like, look, this is barbaric, it's wrong, it's child abuse, clearly. There's in no sane world do we do this. You can't change your gender, okay? This is like treating people with body dysmorphia that on the side of bulimia or anorexia that say, I'm really fat, even though they're not and underweight. And we respond by saying, you know what we need to do? You're right, you are fat. let's give you a surgery to make you even skinnier, even though you're already dangerously skinny. It's the exact same thing. A person comes to you and says, oh, you know what, I'm a different gender. And you say, you know what, you are a different gender. Let's give you a life-altering, permanent surgery that is absolutely horrific to reinforce your delusion on your own body. And so this bill said, look, at least if you're a minor, you're not going to do this. And Killian Timoney voted no on the bill, voted that he wanted to allow those types of practices to continue. And it became quite a big point in this campaign because obviously it's crazy towns. People don't agree with it. Now, we've already seen the media trying to kind of play around with this. I was watching Spectrum News 1 on election night coverage, and it was funny hearing them cover this election. They would say that Thomas Jefferson doesn't want trans kids playing in sports because, you know, he brought up the fact that Timoney voted to not defend women's sports, to allow men who were born men, developed as men, to play in women's female sports. And obviously that destroys the sport. I think we can all agree on that. And so he voted to allow that to continue. And so Thomas Jefferson called him out for it. And the media covering it would say, Thomas Jefferson doesn't want transgender kids playing sports, which is not remotely accurate at all. Thomas Jefferson and I, and just about everybody else, doesn't have a single problem with, you know, a boy who calls himself a girl playing sports. We have a problem with a boy who calls himself a girl playing sports against girls. Let's be clear. You can be transgender, but you have to play the sport of your biological birth, and you can't be taking performance-enhancing drugs. Because you can see that happening, at least women who think they're men will, you know, taking testosterone and kinds of things, which would affect their ability to perform physically above that of women not taking those drugs. But there's no issue with kids playing, or co-ed. It's not like you can't play in co-ed sport. That's not the issue. The issue is we want to protect the competitiveness of women's sports. But anyways, on to Timoney. So during the campaign, Timoney would explain his no vote on Senate Bill 150 by saying it's a parental rights issue. In fact, let me play this news interview he gave to WKYT. Let me play what he was asked about this bill. Let me play for you exactly what he said.
I viewed Senate Bill 150 as a pretty intense parental intrusion bill, and I stand behind where I stand with that. You know, my job as a Republican, as a core ideology, is limited government.
Now that is clearly Killian Timoney's wrong. He's claiming that he voted no on that bill because it was about parental rights, that parents should have the rights to, I guess, abuse their children, because that's what it is. I mean, it's child abuse, and that's why it's not a parental rights issue. Parents can't chop off their body parts just willy-nilly. That you don't have a right to do that. That's abuse, okay? But what's he saying now about his no vote? Well, he's saying a little bit something different. In fact, this here from the Herald Leader, they asked him after the election, they asked if he regretted the votes he took on Senate Bill 150, and he responded with, absolutely not. 60% of trans kids have had suicidal ideation within the past 12 months. 60% of them. They're the most endangered group of children that exists in society today. Whether we understand it, agree with it, or find it as an abomination, or don't care, I will always protect kids, even if I don't understand or agree with it. So he's completely changed his tune, okay? It's no longer about parental rights. He is now claiming that he voted no on Senate Bill 150 because he believes, and this is why he didn't say this during the campaign, because if he had said this during the campaign, it would have been an even larger slaughter at the polls than it was, okay? He didn't say this. So what he's saying, though, is that he believes that if you don't chop body parts off kids, that if you don't give them puberty blockers, that if you don't, here's things they do with this gender-affirming care that Timoney's such a big fan of, apparently, based on what he said here. Here's something they do. A little parental guidance warning here. Okay, so young kids listening, turn it off for a second. They take rolled up socks and shove that down little girls' pants so they can feel what it's like to be a guy. And they call that gender affirming care. They call that treating a child for suicide. That's not health care. That's not mental health care. Mental health care isn't chopping body parts off kids. Mental health care isn't stopping puberty. Mental health care isn't shoving socks down little girls' pants. Mental health care isn't buying into the lies these kids believe about themselves. That'd be like saying, once again, mental health care of an anorexic person would be to tell them they are fat and to give them liposuction. That isn't proper care. But that's what he's arguing here. Now, of course, he clearly isn't following the data either. I would say, well, he's just listening to these experts, but the experts are wrong. But that's not actually what the experts are saying anymore. The data on this is clear. That kids post this kinds of treatments, their suicide rates don't go down. They actually go up. It's causing so much damage that it's now banned in Europe. The way more liberal area than America, Europe, far more liberal with all their laws and everything else. I mean, their conservative party would put a lot of our Democrats to shame. But even they understand and have banned it. And yet here Killian Timoney is rolling out the same things. That's why he didn't say this during the campaign. He tried to make it about parental rights. He said, well, I don't believe in, it's conservative to not, you heard him there, conservative to not go over their rights. Yeah, but that's not what you're saying now. Now you're saying you buy into these liberal lies. And that's why that's why we can't trust you. That's why you're not a representative. That's why nobody can ever vote for you again. You buy into these liberal lies and then put an R next to your name. I'm glad he lost. Well, coming up after this, we'll talk about what the establishment's going to do now. We'll have more on that here in a few short minutes. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So, the Uniparty took a little bit of a shellacking, right? The establishment there, especially in the state house specifically, took a little bit of a shellacking, losing a few of its members, some of its key members, and more so too, losing them not Northern Kentucky. They can't go on to claim this is just a Northern Kentucky thing. You don't got to worry about, nope, it can happen anywhere. They can't continue to just hide away from the fact. I mean, they could try. I mean, I'm sure they will try to explain this away. I'm sure they'll claim, well, Timoney was really far to the left on a lot of his votes. And of course, that creates a lot of issues. And, Richard Heath, he didn't see Kim Holloway coming, and Kim Holloway campaigned for a while, and blah, 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 blah. They'll try to explain it away. They'll point at, Michael Meredith's resounding success and say, look at that. See, vote with us. We can protect you. You're fine. And sure, when some other people end up going down over these next, in 2 years, when one or two more incumbents get taken down, or three even, they'll say, look, they'll have a story about those people too as well. That is probably what they're going to do. They have some different directions in front of them. They have some different options for how they can move forward in the House now. The Uniparty, the establishment. Now, the smartest thing and the best direction for them to do right now would be to come together and maybe have a guns down moment. Call people in. See what we can agree on and what we can't. See how far apart we actually are. Because this is something they actually never did. You see, so often we hear people, especially the establishment talking heads, and we heard a lot of this leading up to the campaign. Probably Monday, I might try to talk about a few places where I saw this. But we see so often these individuals will come up and claim, oh, they're crazies. We can't work with them. We can't do this. We can't do that with them. But yet, the shocking reality is they never even bothered to try. They never even bothered to talk to them. They never even bothered to try to understand where they were coming from to begin with. It didn't agree with them. And so they didn't care, and they decided, I'm not going to listen. And so what they could do is say, you know what? We messed this up. I mean, I could tell you about House members that say, nobody ever tried to sit down and talk with us about what we wanted to get accomplished. So they could try that, something they've never done before. Sit down and actually talk with those that they're spending millions of dollars against and losing to, and try to understand what it is, even just from a sheer fascination standpoint. Why is it that we win being so outgunned and outfunded? What are we doing that is so much different? What are our viewpoints that are resonating? I know you try to emulate it with your campaigning when you send your little mailers and ads, but it doesn't ring true. So they could sit down and say, what can we agree on? Can we agree on something to deal with maybe, I don't know, gambling? Can we come to an agreement that breaks up the monopoly, allows counties and cities to have control over whether or not they want gambling in their areas, because it's a very controversial issue. Some places want it, some places don't. Instead of just serving the horse track mafia and just doing whatever they want you to do, maybe instead you leave it up to the people to decide. Maybe instead of pushing certificate of need laws, maybe say, you know what? We don't actually believe in anything we've pushed on this. We just say it because we're paid to say it, because that's how the money has come in. So we could just go ahead and say, yeah, we can reform certificate of need or get rid of it completely, which would be preferable. What agreement could we come to on this? Right? They can sit down and say, hey, you know what? Let's pass taxpayer-funded lobbying. Let's ban that. Get rid of that. Let's pass a constitutional amendment on ending income tax. Okay, we'll let you go ahead and move forward your bill to ban taxpayer-funded drag shows, because they don't actually really care about the social issues. They're just paid to not let it pass because the Chamber of Commerce and others really, really like taxpayer-funded drag shows, because why wouldn't you? It's a taxpayer-funded festival and event that brings money in to your area. You don't care about the fact it doesn't actually make money for the area because the taxpayer's paying for it. But they love it. It makes them feel special and important. They love feeling like they're inclusive. So they could say, you know what? You can get your way on all these things. Just, leave us in leadership, or leave most of us in leadership, and, let us on these key issues here. Can we be left to deal with this side of things? That could be an option. That could be what they do, but that's not what they're going to do. Okay? They're not going to do that. That'd be the smart move for them, but not the most likely one. Why? Because it decreases their individual power. Remember the flow of power here. Remember how this cycle works. You have groups like the HRCCC, House Republican Caucus Campaign Committee. These special interest groups dump money into it. You have outside PACs that leadership and these people get control of. And they say, if you do what we tell you to do, you get the money into your campaign accounts and we'll defend you. If you ever get challenged, you won't have to worry about us. But if you don't, here's our sticks. It's basic carrot and sticks. Here's our sticks. We're going to beat you with them. And we're going to get you out of office and replace you with a yes man that will do what we say. But if they admit that all these special interests they've been getting money from can't actually help them, because if they admit that, yeah, we spent over $1 million, didn't even come close to taking down a single incumbent, and we got 2 of ours taken down, and we got really close on a third, that if we don't change something there, she's going down too in 2 years for sure. Because that was really close. Too close for an incumbent to feel careful. And so the establishment leadership could say, you know what? We don't actually need that money anymore because it's not actually leading to our victories. We need to listen to the people more. But if we want to stay in office, we got to listen to the people. But that shortens their powers. Because if they don't have control over the money, if they can't be a gatekeeper over what keeps people in office, because remember, politicians are motivated by what? Getting elected and staying in office, getting reelected. And if leadership can't gatekeep the source of reelection in people's minds, and their own minds, well, then they don't have the power. So if they admit money can't keep them in office anymore, or at least there's a certain amount of money that can certainly get it done, that voters are paying too much attention, or that there's enough groups out there that can put enough money in smartly. The technology is such you don't need as much to win, and there's enough groups out there that can dump some money in and make it really difficult for you, if not take down some people while defending their own. Well, if I admit that I'm not gatekeeping that money anymore, well, then I don't have the power. So instead, they probably won't admit that. They probably won't come out to themselves and say, money isn't buying elections anymore. Because then they have to give up their power. Simple as that. So instead, they decide, well, maybe we need to change the rules. That's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned the establishment is sitting around saying, we can't afford to keep doing this. We're quickly losing our position. We swung and missed on Bill Wesley. We swung and missed on every single incumbent that gives us a hard time. And we didn't just swing and miss. I mean, we airballed that. I mean, these people were winning in most of these races 75-25. The closest race on an incumbent we took an aim at was Bill Wesley. And Bill Wesley wasn't exactly in the Liberty Conservative, quote-unquote, circles caucus before. I mean, Thomas Massey put money into him, even admitting he's never actually met him before. Just people around him said, hey, you need to jump into that race. So he got into it. So he was a little late to the draw. But if Bill Wesley, early on, was pulling the support from the Liberty conservative grassroots organization across the state, he may have even done even better. But they swung and missed so hugely at all these people spending so much money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars per race. Losing. So instead, they're going to say, look, you know what? We need to change the rules. I mean, they're not going to justify it in their mind by saying, we need to change the rules or we're going to keep losing. They're going to cook up a reasoning for it. But just how are they going to change the rules of elections? Am I worried about? And what reasoning will they have? Well, we'll be discussing that after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Andrew back here in this final segment of the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Before the break, we were talking about the establishment and how, what are they going to do moving forward? What are they going to do to maintain power? Now, I talked about how they could obviously have a guns down moment conversation with those that they've been fighting against amongst their own caucus. But they're not going to do that because that requires them to give up power and to admit that their way of doing things isn't working. And outside of just the sheer fact that nobody likes to be wrong, people love even more to be power. So what I'm concerned that they will do, and the fight that is coming before is something we all need to be prepared for, is they're going to try to change the rules. I think they will. And I think they're going to try to change the rules to open primaries, maybe even ranked choice voting. And they're going to claim they're doing this because, well, it'll be twofold. One, they're going to talk about turnout. Now, for those of you who don't know what I mean by open primaries, currently in Kentucky, you have to be a registered Republican as of January 1st to vote in the Republican primary. And you need to be a Democrat registered Democrat by January 1st to vote in the Democrat primaries. If you want to vote in the primaries, you have to be registered that way. As of January, 5-6 months out. Open state primaries, what they do is you show up to the polls and you say which party you would like to vote in. You don't have to be a registered Republican to grab the Republican ballot. You can say, I want to vote on the Democrat primary ballot, and then vote on the Democrat primary ballot. I mean, and they're going to claim this because of turnout is the reason why we need to make this change. They'll say, we only had 15% turnout across the state. Well, if we take, for an example, my, ballot that I just voted in primary, it had one race on it, presidential election, that was already decided. There wasn't anything for me to vote on. There's a big part of me that if I wasn't heavily involved in politics, and I would have looked up and seen my ballot was a presidential election that's already been decided, like as it has been, where like everybody's withdrawn, I maybe wouldn't show up. And so they're going to say, look, we want higher turnout. And we need open primaries. And then the other reason they'll give is they're going to be like, well, I think that they'll give, why can't we all just get along? Why can't we just all come together and get along And with our open primaries, it'll get rid of all this rank partisanship, and instead we can offer up the opportunities for the best ideas to win. Okay? Now, that's open primaries. Now, ranked choice voting, for those of you who aren't aware what that is, it's a process of when you show up to vote, you number your candidates like that you're going to vote for, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so basically there's not primaries anymore. There's just like an election in the general. Alaska does it this way, for an example. And you show up and you cast your ballot. And everybody who, your first choice, all your votes go into your first choice. And then if your first choice, they look at the vote totals, let's say there's 5 people in the election. And they say, okay, we're going to drop the lowest vote getter out of everybody's first choice. And let's say that was your first choice. Well, now your vote moves to your second choice. So they get rid of the 5th person. Then everybody whose vote was going into that 5th person's category then gets given to their second person. And then that gets spread out. And then who's ever now in last loses. And everybody who that was the vote that was being counted there, now their votes move down one more spot and get spread amongst the other 3 based upon who they voted for on their ballot after that selection. So if your first one drops and then your second one drops, well, now it's your third vote. Or if your first one doesn't drop till the third round of dropping people, well, you wouldn't move on to your second vote until after that third round. Hopefully that kind of makes some sense to people. And they keep doing that until somebody gets 51% of the vote. So that's ranked choice voting. Now I'm going to tell you why I'm against open seat primaries. First off, I'm against open seat primaries because why should anybody who isn't a registered Republican get a voice in who the Republicans choose to represent the Republican Party in the general election in November? Okay? It's a Republican, right? So we're deciding, what a primary is us deciding as Republicans, or if you're a Democrat, as a Democrat, who you want to represent the party. If you're an independent, if you're a Democrat, I don't want your opinion on what you think the Republicans should put forward as a good Republican candidate. You don't count. Okay? Your opinion doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to any other Republicans. We're picking our candidate. All right? It's for us to decide who shows our values the most. And if you don't even self-identify with us, if you don't even halfway proclaim to have the same values as us, as our party does, why should you get to weigh in on the selection our party makes of who's going to represent it? That's why I'm against open seat primaries. In the same way that Democrats don't want me picking who their Democrat person's going to be, because I could either pick the worst person or I could pick an R running as a D and say, yeah, that's the person I want. Give me the really conservative one that doesn't represent your party values at all. Now on to ranked choice voting. My issues with it is, first, you're now running like against a lot of people. And where you're running against so many people, the competition for attention becomes a lot more expensive. And so if you think money controlling our elections is bad now, go to a ranked choice voting situation and it gets even worse. Now, a lot of times what you're going to get is the worst person too, because you're going to go to the lowest common denominator, which will end up being a uniparty person, of course, because the person that most people can swallow voting for, if they're like, okay, I guess if there's nobody else, this guy's somebody, is going to be a uniparty hack that doesn't believe in anything, because they managed to not offend anyone because they said nothing at all. Dump a bunch of money saying your name while not saying nothing at all. Ranked choice voting is how you're going to win. That's what that incentivizes. And I don't like that. And here's the other thing. You also won't end up with attack ads. And I hate that. And I know everybody's like, oh, no, I hate seeing attack ads. I hate negative campaigns. I hate this and that. But here's the thing. Many voters don't actually like research who they're voting for. They rely on those ads. They rely on those mailers. They rely on those text messages. Let me tell you what it's like going out there knocking doors for candidates. Those of you who've never done it. You can go out there and you're 4 days before the election, you knock the door. And you say, hello, I'm out here knocking for blah, blah, blah. Hoping to count for your vote on election day. 9 times out of 10, the response is, Or I haven't really even looked at the race yet. Or I didn't even know they were running. Or I didn't know this. Or I haven't even looked at it. I collect up everything. I'll sit down and look at it when the time comes. I haven't made up my mind yet. You can be 2 days before the election, and you'll have people saying, I actually haven't really made up my mind in that race yet. You're 2 days out. You haven't made up your mind yet. Are they going to honestly go research this election? They haven't researched it yet. You think they're going to find the time over the next 2 days? Of course not. They're not going to. And so if you want them actually informed on who the candidates are, you have to have negative campaigning. But when you're running against like 5 people, it's harder to pick a person and say, hey, here's the things you need to worry about this person. That's just it. Because it is a choice. And so knowing the bad things about who you may vote for could be really important. Could heavily sway your decision making. Because if it's just whoever has the most money to tell you what you want to hear, well, we're going to pick the worst person, most corrupt person every single time. So, the establishment could try to go the route of changing the rules, and I think they most likely will. They're going to have to. If they're going to do it, they're going to have to do it soon because they're quickly losing seats, and they know that. And here, in the next 2 to 4 years, they're going to have lost too many seats to ever get something passed. And the reason why they'd go that route is because they think it's going to be the way they best stay in power. And Mitch McConnell loves this route too. His choice for Senate up in Alaska only won her seat because of ranked choice voting. So McConnell loves this route. So he could push that. So they could do that. And they could think, well, this is our best way to stay in power. Now that could backfire on them. But I'll tell you a little dirty little secret. They don't actually care. See, they don't care if they'd actually lose seats. They don't care if they'd actually end up in the minority by changing the rules this way. They don't care if they brought in something like ranked choice voting, there'd actually be less Republicans. Because I'll tell you a dirty little secret. They would rather have control over a minority party or a barely important group than diminished control or next to no control over a majority one. It's just the way they operate. They're not actually Team R or Team D. They just play that role in order to get you to vote for them. They claim party unity only in order to make excuses for their own awful behavior. But when rubber meets road, guess what? They'll sell you down a river if they think it's the best way to have more power. They'll sell the Republican Party out if they think that's their path to more power. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today. I know I said I was going to talk about the woman stealing from Canada for Health and Family Services. We'll have to wait for that till Monday. Gives you a reason to tune in Monday. But you hope you guys have a great weekend. We'll be seeing you.